last week's topic was traps, right? So we talked a lot about the traps, how to gain muscle in the traps, how to optimize trap growth, right? Now, there's a concept I think that's actually really interesting. When I was coming up, the big controversy is, could you target different areas of a muscle, right? Some people said no, you couldn't. Some people said yes, you could. Some people are like, oh, all or none, a muscle's activated or it's not. But if you look in my career, one thing I've noticed is that's definitely not the case. Muscles are organized into functional compartments, and you definitely can target different aspects of the muscle. And the traps, not just functionally, but even from an anatomical standpoint, are clearly a muscle that you could target from different regions, right? So, for example, the traps themselves can be divided into 3 regions, and that's when we go with anatomy, right? So traps, you have the upper traps, the mid traps, which is like the kind of, I would say it's more like the upper middle back, and then you have the lower traps, which is like the lower middle back. So people are trying to get kind of a dramatic look in their back, right? From the upper middle, from the middle back to the upper middle back, all the way up to the neck. That's what the traps are going to give you. They're going to give you that detail in the center back, all the way up through the neck. And of course, from the front, they're going to provide a dramatic, element from the front and really set your shoulders off. So basically, the traps themselves originate from actually the skull. The back of the skull is the upper traps, and then you have the middle traps, which originate along the and middle and lower traps, which originate along the mid spine, right? So you got the neck all the way through the mid spine of the back is what your traps are. So really beautiful muscle that you have, and that's kind of where so they originate again from the neck all the way through mid spine. Now they go out and insert on what most people know as like the collarbone, which is here. We think of the collarbone, but really it's called the clavicle, right? So that's the upper traps. So the upper traps are on the neck and the back of the head, and they're inserting onto the clavicle, and they contract. What are they going to do? They're going to move the clavicle up, but not just that, or scapula, right? So they're going to move it upward, like the collarbone and the scapula upward, but they're also going to kind of rotate it up as well, right? So you actually shrug your shoulders up, but also the upper traps, like when you go, say I'm doing side laterals, when I'm past parallel, they actually are important for upward rotation of sort of the shoulder girdle, right? So you have the clavicle, and they're also attaching to the scapula, or like what we call like the shoulder blade. So the traps themselves are not going to just rotate the shoulders up, but also like if I'm doing side laterals, past here, that's the traps, okay? So basically, the upper traps are going to serve to shrug your shoulders up, but since they rotate the shoulders up, that's going to also serve some function. We'll talk about that in a second. The middle traps and the lower traps, basically, when you pinch your shoulder blades together from the back, that's what the middle traps are doing. What's called scapular retraction. But you're just basically pinching your shoulder blades together. That is called scapular retraction. That pinching of the shoulder blades together is going to activate the middle traps. So again, like shrugs, upper traps, but bent over rows, seated rows are going to be the middle traps. And then the lower traps do the opposite of shrugs. So what do shrugs do? They lift your shoulders up. So what do the lower traps do? They bring your shoulders down. So like, how do I target that? Well, it's going to be more like reverse shrugs. So like, say I'm doing like a lat pull down here, right? If I shrug my shoulders down on a lat pull down, or if I'm hanging from a bar, like if I'm doing like a pull up and I'm hanging from a bar and I'm pulling my arms down, that is depression, which is basically the opposite of elevation. So basically, it's called reverse shrugs. So if I grab a lat pull down bar and shrug downward, I'm working that lower part of the back or mid back. And then if I do scapular retraction, I'm hitting the middle of the back. And then I do elevation, I'm hitting the upper traps, right? So that's important to understand. So there's a couple ways that we can apply that, right? one, I think most of us know I'm doing traps, I can shrug upward. But if I'm doing bent over rows, or I'm doing cable rows, if I start here and I first shrug backward or squeeze my shoulder blades backward and keep them retracted, that's going to actually activate my middle traps a lot. So if it's like retraction and then rowing and then moving up and retraction and rowing, that retraction right there is actually going to target those center traps. Whereas again, if I'm trying to target like my lower traps, kind of provide that dramatic look down along the lower aspect of the mid-back, that's when I'm going to do like reverse shrugs. And that'll really bring the mid-back lower, that dramatic look. So the next thing I'm going to say too is basically, so that's kind of the main aspects that you have like on the traps themselves. So moving to like the next lesson is what's the muscle fiber makeup of the traps. They're fairly even mixed. Like they're a little bit slow twitch dominant, like 55% slow and then 45% fast. So kind of 50-50, right? But the main point is that, or 55% slow, 45% fast. But just to remember, they're fairly even mixtures. So that means probably like half of your workout should be heavy and half of your workout should be more light, right? So when I say heavy, I'm talking about a range of repetition, probably anywhere from like 6 to 8 heavy repetitions, and resting maybe 2 minutes between sets. And then the other ones where you're going light is going to be a combination of like 8 to 12 repetitions with like 60 seconds rest, and even greater than 12 repetitions, like 12 to 20 repetitions. That should be 50%. So anywhere from 8 to 20 repetitions going to be half your workouts. The other half is going to be like 6 to 8 repetitions heavy. And you should alternate those. So I would have one day where you're basically doing like super heavy 6 to 8, and then another day where you're doing a mixture of like, maybe 10 to 12, and then burnouts with like 12 to 20. So that's kind of the muscle fiber makeup. The next topic we talked about on traps was like, what about deadlifts? There's actually, if people notice that there are compound movements that really hit the traps, right? So if you're looking at, for example, like deadlifts, people notice a lot of growth on deadlifts when you do them. Well, what part of the deadlifts activates the traps most? Turns out, especially like the upper traps, if you can break the deadlifts into kind of 3 phases, the beginning phase, you're pulling the weight off the floor, the middle to kind of like when you're pulling it to mid-thigh, which is like the middle phase, and then from mid-thigh all the way up. You get the most activation like in the middle of the range, and second most on the top of the range, right? So what this tells, like if you really want to build the traps, instead of doing like full deadlifts for the traps, you probably want to do like rack pulls. So basically like you're doing like partial deadlifts, you're putting the bar on the rack, and you're doing rack pulls. That'll build your traps a lot. The final lesson that we talked about with this was essentially looking at normal shrugs versus modified shrugs. Normal shrugs essentially just elevate your scapula and your collarbone upward, so you're elevating the shoulder upward. But remember, the traps also serve to rotate the shoulder girdle up. So basically, if I were standing, instead of like, I could start with my hands to my sides, but if I move my arms out slightly out to the side, basically what that does is it gives me some upward rotation at the same time that I'm getting elevation. So basically, start with the weight slightly out, or if you're doing barbell shrugs, have a little bit wider grip, and that's going to work on elevating the shoulder up, but also rotating it slightly upward. You'll get more activation when you're doing traps. Another way that you can work on like upward rotation, remember I said side laterals, once you get past here, that's upward rotation. So what Andy and Paul and I were talking about earlier is you can actually incorporate something called reverse flies, like or upright flies. Should be like that. And upright flies, or what are called like European laterals, those actually will target the upper traps because they're getting that upward rotation. So a good superset that you could try out is like doing shrugs to failure, and then grabbing a weight that you could do overhead flies with, and that superset right there could target like the fast twitch fibers, then you could burn it out with higher reps on European laterals. So, so again, let's summarize this up. Traps originate from the skull down to the mid-spine, and they insert out on the collarbone or clavicle and also on the spine of the scapula. So that means they're going to serve to elevate your shoulders up. They're going to also externally rotate your shoulders up this way. That's like European laterals. The mid traps are going to retract your scapula backward. The upper traps are going to depress your scapula down. So that means that you can do a combination of shrugs. Remember, with your arms out a little bit, you do a combination of seated rows, but focusing on retracting your scapula before you row. And then you do a combination of overhead reverse shrugs to depress the scapula. Then we talked about deadlifts. Rack pulls are going to be a great move for deadlifts. And then finally, the traps, train about 50% of the time with very high reps. 50% of the time, you're going to train them with more heavy weights. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get into questions now.
Let me pin this one because this is a good one. All right, pin comment. So volume. Can you elaborate in regards to training and building muscle?
So Monty's talking about volume. Yeah, I'm gonna hit that for you, Monty. So basically, what you want to kind of think about when you talk about volume is, for those of you guys who don't know, we typically measure volume as how many sets you do, right? Now, typically, you could also say sets times repetitions, okay? So, for example, even if you lifted 70% of your 1RM and you hit 12 reps, that's more volume because it's a set times it's the weight times the reps than if you did 85% for 5 reps. You'd still get more total weight lifted if you did the 70% for 12, right? So volume is going to be how many reps you do and how many sets you do. But let's just, for ease sake, just say sets. Volume's a tool. It's a definite tool to gain muscle, right? There's a really good study basically by Robbins in 2009, and basically what she found was that if you took people who did they did I want to say 24 sets of squats a week versus 12 sets of squats a week versus 4 sets of squats a week. So 4 sets versus 12 sets versus 24 sets. And basically Daniel Robbins found that the 24 sets overall over 12 weeks time gained more strength than the group that did only 12 sets, and the group that did 12 sets gained more strength than the group that only did 4. Does that mean that you should train 24 sets? No, because if you look at the first half of the study, there was no difference between the 12 set and the 24 group. But after the halfway point, the 24 set group started making more gains. Now, what that tells me is that, think about, it would have been better probably, and you got more of a shock if you started off with lower volume, probably 8 to 12 sets, and then at the midway point, then you upped it, okay? But there are even better ways to do that. Volume is a tool for me to make gains, but if I actually do high volume all the time, I'm going to overreach and overtrain. That's just the way it is. So that's why you want to periodize things, right? It's very important that you periodize things. So there's a couple ways that you can periodize it, but one way is to step load, where basically you start off week 1 with low volume. Say that's for, I would classify low volume as anywhere from probably 4 sets a body part. And then week 2 you up it to moderate volume, which is 8 to 12 sets per body part. And then week 3 you up it to high volume, which is probably 16 to 20 sets per body part. But that's difficult to sustain. So going back to week 1, you go back down to 4 to 6 sets. Does that make sense, Moni? So that's it. Scott Mitchell says 1-arm barbell shrugs. It's variation. You're not used to it, and so it could definitely work. How do you train your lower traps? And that is Irfan. Basically, Irfan, what you want to do to train lower traps to press the scapula. So that's if you're doing a lat pull down, you're literally shrugging the bar downward. So you know if you have a barbell, you shrug it upward. You literally start with that bar up here and shrug it downward and downward. Or if I'm doing pull-ups, I start by shrugging down and then doing the pull-up, okay? So that is basically how you target the lower traps. Any particular exercise you feel better than others, I think again, selecting like if you're doing barbell shrugs, selecting slightly wider than shoulder width apart is going to be better than normal. But overall, like any muscle group, all these traps exercises, again, I joke about this, but it's like vegetables. You know, what's better, like carrots or broccoli? They're both good. Put them both on your plate. So for traps, you want to hit them with a variety of different shrugging exercises, whether it's barbell, whether it's dumbbell, whether it's cable, whether it's one arm, whether it's seated, whether it's incline, whether it's overhead laterals. You've got to hit them with a lot of different angles. When to hit traps at starting or the end? Typically, I would recommend hitting them at the end of your workout. Okay.
Upright rows with curling bar or a straight bar, so like an easy bar or a straight bar.
I think both are a good tool. I think curling bar or straight bar. What is the best angle for the shrugs to hit the upper traps? The best angle, MHM, is basically So remember, you want to if you're going to take advantage. Remember this. So instead of doing like normal shrugs up like this, you want to have the arms slightly out like this. Okay, that's the key. So either a wide grip here, or you're going to want to not straight in, not close, slightly out here, or slightly like that. That's key, right? So that's the angle. As far as like what is the best angle, you can do them upright. You can do a slight incline, and you can do it a full incline. So you still want to hit the traps through different angles, but as far as like that angle where you're shrugging, slightly in is the answer to that. Anthony Poon says the upper traps don't run vertically, so would it be better to activate upper traps when you combine elevation with traction? Yes, exactly. That's the point. And Anthony, that's the point. So like again, when you basically you do want to kind of have a little bit elevation and some elevation combined with kind of like that upward rotation for sure. Do lower traps and rhomboids train in similar movement? So the rhomboids also are in that center back region, and their main function is to retract the scapula. So the rhomboids, which again provide that middle back thickness along with the center traps, are going to work more with the center traps for middle back thickness, and they're going to retract the scapula back. So if you're a guy or whoever, like I think whether you're a guy or a girl, having a nice back even on stage looks good. If you're trying to get definition in the middle back, that's going to be the center traps, and it's going to be the rhomboids. And to activate them, you're going to want to focus on retracting the scapula. So again, if you're doing bent over rows, for example, or seated cable rows, start with that retraction. You could also simply do horizontal shrugs just like this. Horizontal shrugs. These are great questions, by the way. What do you think using iso holds inner rep? Do reps and hold 3 to 5 seconds. That's Sandrol. Sandrol, I like iso holds, and I'm going to tell you why. So basically, isometric contraction, one of the questions is, can you build muscle doing isometric contractions? You know, if you go back all the way to like, I'm going to say like antiquity, but if you go all the way back, all the way to, the origins of bodybuilding and stuff like that, actually, there was a guy, what was it, 100 years ago? When was it? What was it? Atlas? Charles Atlas. Charles Atlas. That guy was it. Look Charles Atlas up, man. This guy, like, basically, he has a really good story. So Charles, you guys heard of Charles Atlas? No. Okay, Charles Atlas, I think he must have been like the 40s or something like that, okay? So he's before most of your guys' times. Maybe we have some guys who were like around Charles Atlas times. I don't know. When was
born in 1892 and died in 1972.
Okay, so he was around. So yeah, so all right, cool. I remember that. So Charles, look him up. In his day, he was jacked. Okay. Now, if you look like today, like maybe he's not that big, but back in his day, he's pretty jacked. Like for the 1940s, he was probably enormous. So, and basically all Charles, he used to put these comics out, right? And he put comics about him being a skinny kid and people pushing him around, and then he found out how to get jacked. And the way he found out how to get jacked was basically isometric holds. So all his workouts were, he didn't move, he just did isometric holds. So like he'd hold his biceps and just flex the whole time. He'd like hold his pecs and just flex the whole time. Hold his delts up like this and just flex as hard as he could. And he developed pretty good physique doing it, right? But the point is isometric holds going to make you by itself jacked? No. But combined with other techniques will add muscle? Yes. And one of the reasons why I think that is because in between sets, when you do isometric holds of the traps, it causes blood flow restriction in a sense. So actually that contraction, when you contract and you get past something like 50% of your maximal voluntary contraction, you actually restrict blood vessels. And when you do that, that by itself can cause growth. And it can build up and elevate the blood flow and the pump in the muscle. So I do think intraset flexing, intraset isometric holds are very valuable for muscle growth. And in fact, Arnold Schwarzenegger would like between sets, he'd like talk about flexing the muscle between sets. So I do think it could be valuable. Yes. He needs to work a little bit on his quads, I feel. Like, I don't think the isometric holds are working on Charles Atlas's quads. But still, I mean, again, for like only flexing, he's pretty jacked. And for the 1940s?
For the 1940s.
For the 1940s, he was enormous. So, all right. What about horizontal shrugs for middle traps? Yeah, I think that's great. So horizontal shrugs for middle traps and rhomboids, on point.
Would you work traps the same day as shoulders?
You know, Francisco, I think working the traps the same day as shoulders is a really good thing to do. Absolutely. But you can also work on back. Because think about it, if I'm doing, if I'm doing presses, I'm getting some rotation here 100%. In the shoulders, so I'm going to be hitting the traps, right? But also, if I'm doing back, obviously I'm going to hit a lot of center traps. I'm going to depress the scapula a lot when I'm doing pull-ups. So I technically think you can hit the traps on both days.
100%. All right, let's see if we can get through a lot of them. Boom.
Oh, we're going to do quick. So Paul said we're doing rapid fire, so I'm doing rapid fire. You guys ready? Let's do it. Can we do intraset stretch on the traps too? Yes.
Let's see.
Is direct trap work necessary? If you have great trap genetics, no. If you don't, yes.
Where?
What do you think about behind the back shrugs by Kai Green? I think it works. By the way, Kai's an awesome guy.
Boom.
Does thick grip handles make any difference to trap development? No, because the traps aren't connected to the, to your grip. Does pausing on the top and retracting scapula and deadlifts good to activate the traps? Yes, but be careful that you don't like flex your elbows because you could tear your biceps. Which lat trapezius exercise are recommended for computer workers? I mean, I think basically that's going to be like the center. Right here, you're going to do retraction of the scapula to keep your back like this. Are muscle soreness always a good thing? I think it's an indicator of a hard workout. If you're constantly beat up, you may be overreached. But I think it's an indicator of a hard workout. How important is it for females to do shrugs? I never do them. Maybe pros and cons. Ali, I don't think it's necessarily important for females to do shrugs. But again, if for females, I'd say if you want more like that detail in the center back, I think that horizontal shrugs can be beneficial for you. Deadlift on back day or leg day? Switch it up, Francisco, both. What's good for shoulders, barbell press or dumbbell press? Both. When doing shrugs, is it better to hold it, then relax, or just go up and down? I think it's better to get the most out of every aspect of the lift. So I'd come up, squeeze, come down, full range of motion, up, squeeze, come down, full range of motion. That up contraction part gets some of that blood flow restriction. If your limit on time, it would be worth adding isometric lifts. Well, you got to rest between sets, right? So in between sets, just flex the muscles. And then you have time and efficiency. What's your PhD in? Skeletal muscle physiology. Soreness. What are good methods to speed up the process of recovery? Basically, one of the best ways the speed of recovery is, proper post-workout nutrition. Sleep is going to be very important, and periodizing your training. Like, don't have a hard day every single day. Vary it up.
Oh, that line's right here.
Yeah. You should look at each muscle group composition as fast or slow and design your training regimens from there. I do think using the fiber type makeup as a base for your training is a good idea. For example, like the calves are 90%, up to 90% slow. Training them heavy all the time is probably not going to be ideal.
Bam.
What do you think about behind the back? Okay.
No, you're good. I'm sorry.
I guess shrugs. I think they're good.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said. Okay.
45-degree seated bent over trap
So
dominant.
45 degrees seated,
Oh,
bent over row.
bent over row. I
Yeah.
think that's basically going to hit the center traps a lot. So it's a good exercise for center back thickness. Any more questions? Two more?
2 more.
Okay. I beat up my muscle once a week. I'm sore. If I split the volume over 2, I'm not. Is one better than the other? Both are good. Make sure you periodize. Let's see.
Check out our infographics.
Okay, yeah. Where can I find a breakdown of muscle fiber makeup, fast, slow twitch? Check out our infographics on Instagram. We have a lot of that there. Also on our website, themusclephd.com, we'll go more into detail onto that.